Hey guys, this is Luke and this is my CPS Folio. Starting with week 1 observation, I observed a windmill from my back garden by the back deck using Procreate as my tool. I fixated on the object to create a new meaning for the object in that of a magical staff of some wind priest. The time to sit back and observe my surroundings felt artistically fulfilling and refreshing. Most of my previous few years of my artistic pursuits have been strictly for a class or job. Sitting back and taking more inspiration of places around me was enlightening. The finished project is sort of a culmination of this sitting back and just taking photos and observing, finding this windmill and deciding to make a story of it. It was a very good artistic and creative exercise. Moving on to week 2, tinkering, I sculpted a face using the app Nomad Sculpt on my iPad. By playing around in the sculpting tool and learning all sorts of different techniques, I'm now more confident in my character modeling skills within Maya for my Studio 1 class. This has been an excellent learning experience. Similar work to my sculpting has been created many times, although I use Folio1 Ukraine's very large portfolios of character to excite myself within this new medium of creation. Folio1 Ukraine's artists seem quite explorative within the tinkering theme. They may have made many characters, which exemplifies their creativity, I think. Moving on, I'm usually doing my work within sketching on Procreate and then moving that sketch over to Maya and then 3D modeling from there, although I've always been interested in 3D sculpting a character, or at least even just the face. Folio1 Ukraine is the creators of Raid Shadow Legends, which I'm sure many of us have heard in many different ads. But despite that, I think their art is still very wonderful. The character designs are so inspiring, so using this ArtStation page as inspiration, I'm going to give sculpting a go. If I make a beautiful masterpiece, cool. If I make a blob with vaguely face-shaped lumps of flesh, also cool. Moving on to found objects. Responding to this theme, I used a little cactus candle as reference for a low-poly little spaceship. Using Andy Goldsworthy as inspiration, I decided to use what I had on hand in Maya to make the cactus, basic Maya-shaped circles, squares, etc. After creating the cactus, I decided to just use an HDRI, which is just an image that applies light, to apply lighting to the scene. Repurposing this candle has broadened my views of things in my space, similar to the observation theme. Most anything can be used as reference or to help generate ideas. I thought of Andy Goldsworthy as my inspiration for this week, not in the fact to make something similar to he does, but to look at something potentially bland and create something more magical. Unlike his environmental based works, though, I decided on a space cactus ship, although I kept his extreme found object mentality. Moving on to Andy Goldsworthy himself, I do think of him as the pinnacle of found object. His mindset of being able to find different rocks, sticks, or even just water is inspiring. Using this inspiration, this is how I decided upon making my little cactus spaceship. Moving on to week 4, responding to this week's theme of place being that an environment is not just a backdrop for a story. I used Procreate to render this scene. By creating this scene, I thought about how the scene can change whether or not the protagonist has already explored the location. Taking the sword from the stone seemingly removes any purpose or identity from the scene. Although the scene has a completely different feeling upon a second inspection, a place of mystery, somewhere that something must have happened. This idea helped me to develop ideas on world and narrative building and how I could structure a location within my own creations, such as D&D or something like that I would make myself. A similar work that inspired me to this is Elden Ring. Every little place having its own story, cutscenes showing different locations that look beautiful and different from before when the player gets there, yet the location is still interesting and beautiful and one of a kind when the player does arrive. I tried to encapsulate this feeling into my piece. The piece of media that I was referencing, Elden Ring, is an open-world game that expertly and seamlessly makes you want to explore the lands between with no quest markers, characters to tell you to go anywhere at all. You find yourself just wandering and deciding, that looks cool, just to go and have a look. In a single screenshot, there are so many interesting locations. They may be hidden below a huge bed of fog, making you want to look beneath, or a lot less subtle as something like a giant castle or some other building. The world is brimming with the need to be explored, and I think that comes through the player due to the character of the game and hidden locations all being a new obstacle to overcome for treasure and loot. My aim for that week was to recreate a feeling that I've had replaying this sort of game for the second time, where a new location is magical, thrilling, and is like no other, emitting life and begging the player to explore it just to see what happens. Although, once it has been experienced, it loses that sense of character and becomes just another room. But I suppose an environment still retains character after its main objective has been completed. It would be strange to come across a broken pedestal with a large sword-like indent in it, leading the mind to think of new stories for an old environment. Hint, hint, just like the image that I drew on the previous slide. Moving on to week 5, I responded to the theme of orientated ontology. I created a short 2D animation of a plant growing from the corpse of an animal using the digital software Procreate yet again. By creating this animation, I show the classical cycle of life, death, and rebirth, a natural cycle that with no matter how much human interference or presence, cannot be changed. Relating back to the topic of object-oriented ontology, work that made me think of this would be the various nature documentaries that sort of explore a similar theme through the complete capture of information through film using the largest of cameras and lenses to capture nature from such a distance that animals live as if we were not even there. And here is the short little animation that I made once it loads. Yep, so just a skull disappearing into the ground, sort of becoming feed for this little plant to go. Anyway, moving on to week 5, sorry, my related work. I think that rather boringly, I did skip out on using a man-made object and what its life may entail when humans are not involved, but I wanted to keep to a literal meaning of no human interaction or interruption and stick with something completely natural. I thought about when prompted with it having to do nothing with humans, just nature documentaries, the crazy huge lenses and expensive cameras, the effort they go through to record nature from such a distance that the animals and nature itself feel at peace and just go about their natural cycle of life. And that's when I created my 2D animation to sort of represent that, just the natural world going about its thing in spite of human interaction. In conclusion, I think my favourite themes were 1, observation, and 2, tinkering. The time to sit back and observe the surroundings, as I said, felt artistically fulfilling and refreshing, where most of my previous years have just been me making art for a reason, such as work or school or something else. It felt good to just sit back and make. Moving on to the second theme of tinkering, this class gave me the time to test out a new medium that I hadn't used before, and doing that actually taught me lots of skills and gave me lots of other ideas to implement into my current workflow to make myself better at what I already do, which is, again, extremely fulfilling. And as it says, this is the conclusion of my folio. Thank you very much for listening, and let's see how we go next semester.